Hello there and welcome to Forever Sports. Very interesting news coming out of the South African rugby camp with MTN having officially ended their sponsorship of the Springboks. Effective immediately. They will no longer appear on the front of the jersey. And it was always a bit of a controversial sponsorship because a lot of people just did not like the way that the logo looked on the jersey. And a lot of people I think are very grateful. But to give MTN their dues, regardless of what you felt in terms of what it looked like, this MTN logo on a Bok jersey is now synonymous with success. They took over after the 1 year stint of Blue Label Telecoms. And after taking over, we won 2 World Cups, British and Irish Lions Series, 2 rugby championships, and done pretty well. So for all that, it was a bit of an eyesore at times. I think, will probably become quite iconic in terms of you'll continuously watch the Springboks doing well while seeing that MTN brand. So from them, it's been an absolute masterpiece. The big thing as well is that it funded a lot of the Bok activities. It was a huge multi-million rand sponsorship that really did power through with the likes of a SuperSport, the Bok's success, in terms of allowing them to do the amount of lineman camps they do, to fly players in and out, and to fly families in, for example, and to do a lot of things that other teams don't, which enables them to perform at sort of the highest level. So, yeah, I mean, if over the years, this was kind of what it kind of looked like. Now, I think it did get substantially better when they kind of moved away from that the yellow sort of tag and then just had the outline with the lettering, which I don't think actually looked too bad. That was very much in your face, wasn't it? And it was frustrating that there was no they didn't do more with what they could have, I think, in terms of that jersey. And I always think when it comes to I think that was a lot better. That's what I was trying to get to. When it comes to sort of sponsorship, it's always a bit of a toss up, isn't it? Because you've got to try and make sure your brand looks good. But I always find that the best sponsorships are when brands are willing to adapt their brand model to whatever they're sponsoring and the circumstance, and that's why I think that this sort of the circle looked a lot better when it was cut out rather. I mean, I think it was just the lettering. I don't think anybody would really mind it, and because that was horrible. So it's an interesting one to try and get right. Now, in terms of what they've said about this, MTN's CEO Charles Malapsi said this has been the most awe-inspiring and rewarding partnership for MTN after coming in as lead sponsors during a more difficult period for rugby in 2017, after the Boks had not fared as well after last winning the World Cup in 2007. So that's what I'm saying. 2017 they came in, and after that they won everything. So it's a huge sponsorship to lose. Now, but the big question, I suppose, ranked before I want to look at some other things is that who replaced them. Now, let's have a look at what we've seen through the years, and maybe it might have an indication of kind of what to expect. So, in terms of through the years, the Boks' first ever, by the way, title sort of shirt sponsor, was Lion Lager, and it eventually sort of migrated to the middle, but that was obviously back then when we had just the one logo on the shirt. We had our Springbok logo, whereas now, for example, the Springbok logo is here. We've now got the South African Sports logo over there. So from Lion Lager, we then went to Castle Lager. Now, this for me is a pretty good iconic look. And look how clean it is as well. If we went to go with Castle Lager now, for example, moving forward, it would be a very different look. I think it would be the full Castle Lager with the different imagery and the likes of that. It probably wouldn't just be the text Castle Lager, which I think looks really good. And it works from a color point of view. And that's always an interesting thing, brands who... And this is also, where the team itself that do the sponsorship, where some sort of teams will insist that whatever the sort of the logo is, that it abides with their branding. That fact that, I don't know, you could have it at Vodacom or Absolute, when we look at it, it's a good example, but it has to be yellow. They're not going to have a blue logo on the middle of the shirt. And we've seen this previously in lots of different sort of club settings. I mean, I remember Manchester United, Chevrolet, and they did a mock-up with a plain white Chevrolet logo that worked really good, but Chevrolet said, no, they want their full color logo. And we see that a lot, especially when it comes to like cricket sponsorships, for example. And even, I suppose, when you look at the Boks and you look at sort of their shorts and stuff like that, you do see the other brands that come through very much incorporating the brand's colors as opposed to just a version of the logo which is within the brand and the team's colors. So from Castle Lager, we then went to Sasa. Now, this for me is the most iconic of them all. This was me growing up. I grew up. I still got one of those shirts in my cupboard. The old cotton. I mean, a bit worrying, isn't it? That everybody talks about, you look at old school, and the whole old school brand is to go and get the big cotton jerseys. I had a few of them growing up. So it's an interesting thing where kids now will actually not even understand that they did have to wear these cotton jerseys. And I never really wore them when I played, for example. I'm not that old. But the fact that, it's now considered iconic to go back to the cotton jerseys, which was, I had them growing up. And I think Sasol for me was the big one. I always sort of associated Sasol with the Springboks. It was never a petrol station for me. It was the sponsor of the Springboks. And I think that's an interesting concept, isn't it? When you talk about sponsorship, the fact that some of these sponsors are so synonymous with brands that fans don't even know what the sponsors do. They just sort of think, oh, that's the brand. And that's kind of what the point is, isn't it? Is to try and get that sort of, that recognition. Obviously, ideally, you want to then be able to grow your brand in terms of people understanding what it is. But there's always two goals of any sort of sponsorship, and that is either brand awareness or conversion. MTN, are they trying to now sell lots of different cell phone contracts, or is it about brand awareness? Is it about people knowing what MTN is? And so as soon as they go onto a cell phone website, look at it, they see the MTN, they go, oh, that's the thing that sponsors the box. I'm going to go with them. So for me, always felt that Sasol was still, to me, the most sort of iconic one. From there, we went to APSA. Not a particularly popular one either because of the icon there. Again, it was just the taste, people can get behind it. But at least it was yellow. I don't quite know what John de Villiers was doing in this situation with a bit of a weird photo shoot. There we went to Blue Label Telecoms, and they were there for just a single year in 2016 before MTN took over, and we ended up with, that was the last jersey that MTN ever had, and a jersey which we had for a season before we went to the World Cup, and that was a jersey from last year. So now the question is, what next? Now, rumor has it that F&B is going to be the one to step in. They already are the headline sponsors of our women's team, and so that's quite an easy thing. And they're already a major partner of the Springboks. So they are set to apparently take over and step in and become the new jersey sponsorship. But it's funny how certain brands get it right. And actually what I thought I'd do whilst looking at this is look at some of the more sort of iconic sponsors over the years. And for me, for example, like Scotland, you think of Famous Grouse. And I mean, such a match made in heaven, wasn't it? And for years, they had Famous Grouse. And you sort of associated it with the brand. Scotland Rugby, Famous Grouse. You think of a jersey, that's what it looks like. You think of the blue, you think of the purple. Yes, that's a white jersey. But then you think of, Famous Grouse as the sponsorship. Another big one was Brains Beer that Wales had for years and years. And again, you think of the iconic Wales jerseys and all those sort of things they had. That was the brand, and this was the one that had to be quite clever. In fact, fun fact, when it was in France, they couldn't do it because they couldn't advertise booze on shirts, and they had to go a whole different route in terms of how they were to sort of create the brand, because they couldn't actually just put their logo. So it's quite an interesting story. You should actually go read up about that and see how they had to get really creative. In terms of generating a bit of interest with what the jersey said when they went to go play on for France. Another one for me is Qantas in Australia, and again, that's an example, for example, of having the red logo, the wing of the plane, or the tail of the plane. But for me, I think Australia jersey, I think the wallaby, obviously, the gold, the yellow, the stars, I think was a big thing always growing up, and then the Qantas on the top. So probably one of the most iconic then is the final one I've got here, which is the O2 England Rugby in O2. That was England Rugby for years. I just think of Andy Robertson, cutting through defenders and Johnny Wilkinson rolling it back in pretty much those jerseys actually that was on screen. So if you can get your sponsorship right, it's amazing how iconic they can become. And it sounds pretty simple, but it's a fun thing to look at. And moving forward now, the box is going to see what we've got. And if it is going to be an F&B, I really hope that they get it right and they make it look good, because, it's a really, really important jersey, an iconic jersey. And we want it to look as good as possible. We want people to not sort of go past like, ooh. And what we saw last year or 2 years ago when Nike took over is that the demand is massive for these jerseys. In fact, Nike grossly underestimated the demand for Bok jerseys, and as a result, they actually couldn't keep up with the demand. So, MTN, no more. What we're going to see? What would you like to see? I mean, Monster's now probably a partner. You've obviously got SAB's a big partner. I don't think that those brands can actually afford just how much MTN we're paying. So F&B could potentially be a big one. But it's a big sponsorship, so it's going to have to be a lot of money. It wouldn't surprise me personally if it's not F&B, if we see an international sponsor. You know, Ineos, for example, are the kit and apparel sponsor for the All Blacks. Are we going to potentially see an international sponsor sponsoring the box, which would be a very interesting one as well. Let me know what you thought about MTN down in the comments below. Smash the like on the video, subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.